that?
Numbers.
Well, the one thing that you get from this, that we've gone over and over several times, is God is just so specific, isn't He? He is very, very specific. So the people who generalize this and try and make it a spiritual application or a allegory or something else, it's really so hard when you take it verse by verse and read all of these details as to how in the world you do that, because God is being extremely specific here about what He is going to be providing. All right, get your packet ready because we're going to need to be looking at it. There's a little bit of this that's going to be kind of tricky for me to teach. I'm going to do the best I can with it. Take this one here and look at it. Yours doesn't have all the writing on it. And the page that comes after it out of your book. And just pull one of them out and look at it. I gave you two of the same thing just because I thought maybe one might be easier for one reason or another to look at, but it's the exact same thing. And so this is giving you a diagram of what we're going to be talking about. Hopefully it will make it a little bit easier. One of the trickiest parts of this is that if you look at verse 1, you'll see that it says a section of the land, its length shall be 25,000 cubits and the width 10,000. See that in verse 1 of our text on this. Take a look at that if you don't have it in front of you. So it says 25,000 cubits and the width 10,000. The reason why I need to bring this out to you is, do you notice something about the word cubits?
Italic. It's italic.
What does that mean?
It's not in the original.
It's not in the original, it is added. Okay, so that has been added in. If you go back to chapter 42, verse 16, you'll see that Ezekiel has already told us that they are measuring this same area, but they are not using cubits in 42:16. They are using rods. Okay? And so because cubits is added in here and is accepted through a lot of the translations, you'll see that on the map that you have, they're using cubits. And they're giving you measurements based on cubits. However, the King James Version and Arnold and the NASB and a lot of the older, more word-for-word translations do not use cubits. They use rods, going back to 42:16, using the same thing. Now, what would the difference be? Well, a cubit, if you remember, is 21 inches. A rod is 10 foot 4 inches. So if you're using a measurement of a cubit, your area is going to be much, much smaller than if you're using the measurement of a rod.
What's the rod again?
10 foot 4 inches. So you can see that it substantially increases the size. So just for example, if you look at this first page and it says 2,500 cubits, 8.18 miles. Okay? Well, in Arnold's estimation, and if you go by the King James, and if you go by chapter 42:16, that makes that not 8 1/8 miles, but it makes it a 50-mile radius. So instead of 10,000 cubits, 3 1/4 miles, it makes it 20 miles long. So you can see that this is going to substantially increase the size of all of this area. I could not find a diagram using rods giving me the measurements in that, but I could find several using cubits. So it appears to me that a lot of the maps use cubits, even though it's in italics, that rods is used in 42:16 for this exact same area. So I'm going to tell you the way that Arnold taught it to us. He believes that it's rods, which would...
Neither one is in the Hebrew? You can't go back and tell?
No, it just gives you the measurement and there's nothing after it. There's no description in the Hebrew.
You're going back to chapter
42:16 to find out that it was rods being used first.
Okay.
And so he believes that it's the same rods being used. It's not worth arguing except for just to say, under that estimation of using rods, you're looking at a substantially bigger area than what you are if you use cubits. Now, before we get into that, I want to show you the next page on in your packet, this one here that has the map. Remember that Israel is going to be substantially larger than it is today. So if you look at this little map that I included here, this is just a reminder. All this is a reminder to you. That the area in dark is Israel of today. The little small area that's dark. That's today's Israel. The outlined area is the promised borders of Israel, which we know that during the millennial kingdom, all of that land will belong to Israel. Just a reminder to tell you Israel is going to be much bigger than it was.
I don't have that page.
You don't have it?
No.
Get another packet. Maybe you got a packet that it got skipped or something. So we can see, and then again we've discussed the fact that at the end of the tribulation and when Jesus comes, remember, there's a huge amount of change that's going to occur, right? There's earthquakes, there's a valley that's going to increase. This temple in itself is what? Raised up into the highest mountain of the area. The highest mountain of all is going to be where this millennial kingdom is. So it certainly is feasible, although people will argue it, that this area that we're talking about for this kingdom, while it might seem unlikely to people in the little area that Israel is now, keep in mind that this is all going to be Israel. Changes things dramatically, right? So you've got to think kind of outside of the box of that. So on this map that I gave you, where they have 8.5 miles and 3.25 miles, if you go under rods, that area is actually 50 miles by 20 miles. You might want to write that down. Under the formula for rods, it is 50 miles in length. Length is running east to west, while your width is running north to south. So 50 miles long by 20 miles wide is the Levites district. While we're here, let's just do it all. Go down to the Holy District area. That is 50 miles long by 20 miles wide using the rod formula. The area around the temple, that little tiny speck that's on the Holy District, is the sanctuary. That area, we know from previous measurements, is 1 mile by 1 mile. So it's a little tiny speck on our map, but that's 1 mile by 1 mile squared for just the temple compound, just where the temple area is. Then you go down to where it says city district, city, that's 50 miles long by 10 miles wide, as we begin to talk about that. You can see that that is a substantially bigger area. What that tells you that this entire area in white on your map here is a 50 mile by 50 mile area. Stop and think about that. 50 mile, that's down to Modesto, right? Or more. Down, I'm not good with mileage. And to Stockton, maybe. I don't know.
Well, 66 from Miwok to Modesto. So
is it? Okay. So that's a huge area of land that is just going to be divided up for the people who are part of this holy portion. In the original, it's called the Holy Oblation. It just means that which is designated just for this holy area. That's not even talking about this brown area on the side that we're going to get to in a little bit. That's just talking about the area in white. So, while we're reading cubits, I wanted you to recognize why rods is a likely option and why Arnold teaches it that way and why the King James puts it in there. There just simply is no description. There are some things that have a description, and when they do, for example, look at verse 2 on your text. It says, "Of this there shall be a square plot for the sanctuary, 500 by 500 rods, with 50 cubits around it for an open space." Notice that cubits is not in italics. So that is specifically in the original. We know that that is cubits. So that's talking about this area that is around this little black speck. and that is going to be an 87-foot green belt that's going to be around this tiny little speck of a temple that's a mile by a mile. But the reason why we're accepting that as cubits is because it's specifically listed in the original as cubits. And so we know that that is an area that's a legitimate thing. All right, I hope I didn't confuse you. Now I'm going to start at the beginning. All right, moreover, when you divide the land by lot into inheritance, you shall set apart a district for the Lord, a holy section of the land, and its length shall be 25,000, and its width 10,000. It shall be holy throughout its territory all around. And so he is talking about this white area that we've been discussing. That's the holy portion of the land. I pulled a couple of scripture verses that I've got in the back that I'm going to use occasionally. You have them here. Right here's where I'm going to use the Daniel one. In Daniel 12, if you remember when we did Daniel, we talked a little bit about this. Daniel 12 verse 13, it says, "As for you, Daniel," he's talking about, "go your way until the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days," not at the end of Daniel's days, at the end of the days, that terminology is talking about this time frame of Ezekiel, "you will rise to receive your allotted inheritance." That is the inheritance of the people. And we talked about it when we studied Daniel. A lot of times it's you will rise to receive your allotted lot or inheritance. It's what is promised to you back in Daniel. This is what the Jewish people have been promised. You can't ever forget that. This millennial kingdom time, when this land of Israel is as big as that map I just showed you, when everything is perfect for them, when they are the light of the world, when the King of Kings is ruling and reigning from the temple area, all of that, that's the inheritance of Israel. That's what they've wanted all along. That's what was available to them all along, should they have done the things that they were supposed to have done. Just because it's postponed and it's going to be at a later time frame doesn't mean that it wasn't what God had intended for them from the very beginning. And so in our book of Daniel, we read about that, and Daniel will rise during the millennial kingdom. He is one of the ones who will rise and be there to receive his inheritance of land. And when we get to our last chapter of Ezekiel, you'll see there's a division of the land going to be given to all the different tribes, where the people of Israel are going to have their appointed, inherited land that God has intended for them. And so just a little reminder of when we were there in Daniel. Now, also right below it, Joshua 13:6. There's a verse, and it says, "All the inhabitants of the mountains from Lebanon, as far as the brook Misrophoth and the Sidonians, them I will drive out from before the children of Israel." Here's the important part. "Only divide it by lot to Israel as an inheritance, as I have commanded you." Now this was when Israel first goes into the land of Canaan. Joshua is the one who takes them in there, and they begin to drive out all the people who were already in there. And the forerunner for their inheritance happens then, because that's when Joshua is going to, by lot, they will pick what area of the land they get at that time. This is slightly different because God already knows. He's already going to tell us in chapter 48 exactly where their inheritance is going to be. We're going to see maps that is going to divide it all up, and we're going to see where their inheritance is going to be. So it's already pre-decided what they're going to have. But we see an example of that when Joshua first goes into the land of Canaan, and the land is divided up for an inheritance at that time. All right. Let's go to verse 2 of our text. "Of this there shall be a square plot for the sanctuary, 500 by 500 rods, with 50 cubits around it for an open space." Okay, looking back on your map again, you can see that he's talking about this area, this 1 mile by 1 mile with the green belt around it, that's for the sanctuary. So this is the district you shall measure, 25,000, again, cubits is in italics, nothing was there, long and 10,000 wide. It shall be the sanctuary, the most holy place. It shall be a holy section of the land belonging to the priests, the ministers of the sanctuary, who come near to minister to the Lord. It shall be a place for their houses and a holy place for the sanctuary. So what he's talking about here is this holy district down here where the sanctuary is. You can see that the sanctuary, even if we extend this and make it the larger rod-sized, it's going to be a small portion of that. And then there is going to be an area for the priests. Is this for all of the priests? No. This is for the priests, the sons of Zadok, the ones who have the special duty of being able to minister directly to the king. They are not, it is only the Zadok priests who will live in this area and minister to the temple. He talks about an open green belt around it so that they cannot build their homes too near to the temple area. There's a section around it where they will have their homes. Now, Sherry asked a good question. She said, are they going to have all of their families there? We're not told. But I can only imagine that my opinion would be no. My opinion would be this is where they do their service work, and then they would have their homes with their families, because the holy is not to be mixed with the secular. Mm-hmm. God's really clear that this isn't where your kids are raised and you do all the family things that you do. This is for special ministry work. And we're also going to see the same is true for the Levites. There are chambers going to be in their area, but not enough chambers for all of them. So they'll be rotating through doing their ministerial work, and yet living in an area that is outside of that. There's going to be a lot of land available, so they would be able to do that, much like we know that they did in the Old Testament, even in the days of Jesus, when John the Baptist's father goes in, he's coming in to do his duty, and then he goes back home in 2 weeks to his wife. That was a common thing that they did. So my guess would be no, even though it doesn't specifically say that. It seems to make sense.
You can't screaming little kids. And
yeah, it doesn't seem like that's the appropriate place, does it? All right. So, let's see, that's, all right. Verse 5 of our text. An area 25,000, again cubits in italics, long and 10,000 wide shall belong to the Levites, the ministers of the temple. They shall have 20 chambers as possession. So now he's talking about this upper district here, this Levites. You notice it's a little bit further away. God always does that, doesn't he? He makes the holiest areas surrounding him, and then it goes out from there. And so this is the Levite area, and remember that they're going to be able to do the work of the compound, the everyday work that needs to be done. They're going to be butchering the animals. They're going to be helping with the sacrifice. The only thing they're not going to do is minister directly to the king. And they're going to have 20 chambers there. That's what lets you know that they're not all going to be there at the same time, because there's going to be more than 20 Levites. And so they'll rotate through and do what it is that they need to do. So they get a good section for that too.
Sweetie, is
Yes.
that kind of like being the janitor?
Well, custodian. Let's call them a custodian. It just sounds nicer.
Dungeons don't kill stuff.
They'll have important jobs. You know, they do have important jobs. It's just not the jobs that they had when they were the head honchos in the day where the high priest came from them and that sort of thing. All right?
They
So
could have had a much better job.
the bathroom's being used, Cheryl, just let you know. And so they will have important tasks that they need to do. All right, let's look at verse 6. Properties of the city and the prince. You shall appoint as the property of the city an area 5,000 wide and 25,000 long, adjacent to the district of the holy section. It shall belong to the whole house of Israel. So in that case, he's talking about this small section that's down here that's listed as city district, city, and area for crops and produce. We're going to read more about that in the chapters that follow up. So all of the information on that is not what we're reading today. That area is 50 miles long if you go by the rod measurement. 10 miles wide. That is going to be where the city of Jerusalem is going to sit. Okay, that's the city. If you remember early on when Ezekiel first gets taken, he looks off and he sees the city. And this is the city that he gets to see. And as I said, we'll read more about the open space that surrounds it. It is going to be the holy city of Jerusalem at that time. So when you look at this map, what's the first thing that you notice that seems weird compared to the other
The
temples?
temple's not in Jerusalem.
There you go. Isn't that strange?
Yeah.
And you don't really recognize that until you see this map
Right.
laid out, that it's not, the temple compound is not right in the center of the city. Instead, it's going to sit on this elevated mountain area where you travel up to go to the temple. It's going to definitely be distinct and separated away from the city of Jerusalem. And this is going to be the city district. We're going to find out that that's an area for crops, produce for the workers of the city, just living things that you would do in a normal living area. And then there's going to be a section over here that's going to be used to produce crop. And the crops are going to be plentiful, and there's going to be, everything's going to just produce in a mighty way while it's there to feed all of these people. We also find out that it is going to belong to the house of Israel, to the whole house of Israel, meaning that you will have people from all 12 tribes living together in this city district. What exactly are they doing there, and why are they separated from the allotted lands that they're going to be given? I don't really know. But we do know that this area is going to be an intermingling of people from all of the tribes. You can stop and think about it. Maybe they are the one representative of their tribes, and they make decisions, and they decide crop stuff, and they do, I don't know. I'm just guessing. That's just, there are
I
different.
have to think that when Israel recognizes Messiah, that then they're going to want to go back and see for themselves where he was. Where we are drawn now to Israel,
Could be.
and they are going to want to know, where was Jesus?
Could be. That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. So the draw of the city of Jerusalem is strong for a lot of people today, and so maybe the same in this millennial area. Although he will be in this area, ruling and reigning. All right, verse 7. The prince shall have a section on one side and the other of the holy district and the city property, and bordering on the holy district and the city's property, extending westward on the west side and eastward on the east side, and the link shall be side by side with one of the tribal portions from the west border to the east border. So that sounds confusing, but really if you look at the map, it's so much clearer. There's a section of land on each side of this area that is going to be designated to the prince. So now we're getting a little bit more information about the prince. When you stop and think about it, that's a pretty good section of land, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you look at it in comparison to all the rest of this, and this is going to go all the way out to the Mediterranean Sea.
Wow.
That's the border of this land. And this one is going to go all the way out to the Dead Sea. That's the land. So you can imagine that this is a really good stretch of property. Now we are going to find out in our next chapters coming up that this Dead Sea is going to change. It's no longer going to be the salted sea, the Dead Sea. It's going to be alive. It's going to change, and there's going to be big differences there. But this is still going to be property that is given to the prince. So tell me so far what you know about the prince.
He's a leader.
A leader.
Israel,
Hanasi, meaning leader. So he's a leader. What else?
Going to eat in the eastern gate.
Okay, he can eat in the porch
Yeah, the porch.
of the eastern gate. That very sacred gate that God says is not going to be opened and that was closed when he came through it. The prince is allowed to go in there and actually eat food and commune with God on the porch of that gate. What else do you know?
You said he's going to have sons.
Okay, we're going to find out he's going to have sons, and he's going to give some of this land to his sons. God's going to allow him to allot this land to his sons. He's someone very special to God. Now I've told you that Arnold teaches, and based on our past chapters, I also know that there are several other. David Guzik teaches it. There are John MacArthur teaches it as a strong possibility. He just won't take a stand. But there's a lot of them who teach that this is King David, brought back in his resurrected form, who is God is honoring in a way for all of his service. And so many people do believe that this is King David coming back. But it doesn't have to be King David. We just know that it's a leader, and we know that this leader has a special place in God's heart. And there's some reason why he is being honored far above anyone else. And so he's going to be given this land. Verse 8, the land shall be his possession in Israel. It's going to belong to him. It's his property. And my princes shall no more oppress my people, but they shall give the rest of the land to the house of Israel according to their tribe. And so what he's saying there is this is going to be his own personal property. It doesn't belong to, like the Queen of England. There's properties of the Queen at Buckingham Palace belongs to the estate of the Queen. So it's not her personal property. But she has castles scattered around that are hers. She can give them to her children or grandchildren. It's her inheritance. Well, it's that same sort of thinking. This doesn't belong to anyone else. This is his own personal property that is going to be given to him. And it talks about my prince is no longer oppressing. That means they're not going to need to go out and take any land. The people who are in this leadership, the prince and the prince's son and the leaders, are not going to need to go out and take land for their own use anymore, because all the land that they need is going to be allotted to them. And so God is going to make sure it's fair and that everyone has more than they need. There'll be no need to ever confiscate any kind of land. Verse 9, thus says the Lord God, enough, O princes of Israel, remove violence and plundering, execute justice and righteousness, and stop dispossessing my people, says the Lord God. I always love it when you see God chastising someone for mistreating his people. I mean, he is the perfect example of a parent, right? You want to mess with us, mess with our children. And we are going to stand up and say, you can say whatever you want to say about me, but don't treat my children like that. We're actually going to, in our small groups tonight, going to be doing a little lesson on that. It's the Matthew 25, when God is going to talk about the goats and the sheep, and he separates them up, and he says, you know, when did we see you? And we did all that stuff for you. And he says, when you did it to the least of my brethren. We teach that oftentimes as, you know, we're all the brethren and it's the church, and that's okay, that's all right. But Jesus is talking to a Jewish audience, and he is talking to Jewish people about Jews, and he's talking about an end-time scenario. During that tribulation period, there is going to be a judgment on people on how they treat the Jewish people during the tribulation time. God is going to have an expectation that those who are left here, will protect his people. Just like some of the righteous Gentiles did during the Holocaust. Not enough, but some. There is a special provision. Those who will treat the Jewish people during the tribulation are going to be judged on that, depending on whether they treat them well or treat them badly. And so God is very protective of his people. And here he is going across what he has in previous chapters of Ezekiel called false shepherds. You bad leaders who take your people down a bad pathway. Remember how many times you hear him said, boy, if you have a lot of authority, if you're a preacher, or an elder, or teacher, you're held accountable for what you do. And that is true. That is very true. Because if I knowingly am teaching you something false just so that you'll believe the way that I believe, or if it somehow benefits me and makes me look important, or I don't know, any other reason you can think of why someone would do that, then I am accountable for the ignorance that you learn. Boy, that's really something that we all need to take very seriously. God does not allow you to go out and knowingly do things that are in disregard for his people. In this case, the Jewish people, but for all of us, for God's people. Not just the Jewish people, for anyone that we're in charge of. So it's a strong indicator here that God is coming down on them and saying, it is enough. You've done enough damage. Remove violence and plundering. There is no need for you. You're going to have plenty of land. You're going to have plenty of crops. Anything and everything that you should want or need is going to be there for you. Execute justice and righteousness. Isn't that what he has told them in the entirety of Torah? If you look through the books of the Bible and all of those things we went through in Ezekiel, if an ox falls into a hole, and if he kicks someone and hurts a slave, and if your son does this or if a daughter does that, here's what you need to do. God was very specific. Execute justice and righteousness. Why? Because we are in the image of God, and he is righteous, and he is just. And so he wants us in our simple, earthly, human ways to strive to execute and be in the image of him. And that is definitely what he has an expectation of his leaders to do. Why is it when a leader falls, oftentimes the whole body comes down? We've been watching the Waco thing on. They're doing this 6-part series on Waco, Texas, and with that goofy guy, David Koresh, and he brought all of these people in and did all of this. Well, when they went after David Koresh and they take him down, there's 70 people in that compound who get slaughtered because they chose to follow and stand behind him. And there were some that didn't even want to stay, and they had to stay. The same thing with a guy over in Ghana who takes, 900 and something people. They drink the Kool-Aid. Many of them wanted to leave and they couldn't. When a leader is taken down, oftentimes the people lose the ability to save themselves. And God knows that. He knows that power. And so today when a leader of a church, when a pastor gets caught doing something they shouldn't do and they fall, we oftentimes bear the price for that, don't we? Because we're held up as people who follow after such. And God does not look kindly on those who tarnish his reputation. And so he's coming after them. Stop dispossessing my people. That's just a terminology letting them know that they should have had what I intended for them all along, but you have pulled them out. They're now in captivity in Babylon. They're going to be for 2,000 years wandering until 1948, when finally they begin to come back to their own land and stuff. They were never given what God had intended for them because they chose to follow after evil leaders. And God says that cannot happen anymore with my people. Now, 10 is going to take us down another path. It says, you shall have honest scales, an honest ephah, and an honest bath. All right, those are weights of measurements. He's not talking about a soaking tub bath. Sorry. If you look on here, I've given you a charts list in your packet today. And I made a little notation and a star around the measurements that are in our text for today, so that when you get them home and you look at them, you can see, you can spend a little bit more time with them if you're interested in seeing what they are. But they're all a type of measurements. They're either a dry measurement, or they are a an ephah is a dry measurement, which would be flour or grain or anything like that you have. A bath's just what it sounds, a liquid measurement. They're all just a type of measurement that they would have been familiar with. And then there's the coinage that we're going to be talking about, which is the shekel, the gera, and the mina, all types of coinage that they're going to use during this time. So if you choose to, you can look at that and kind of see the amounts of measurement. It's this chart has it, for example, the ephah is 22 liters or 24 quarts. So you'll easily be able to kind of get a judgment of how much he's talking about with transferring it onto that. So he's telling him, I want you to have an honest weight. So that would tell us that significantly that's been a problem in the past. And we know for a fact that at the time of Jesus, it was a big problem. That the weights and measurements were not being used appropriately. That the priests were attempting to actually make money off of what was going on. That when coinage came in, it needed to be converted into the temple coinage, not the normal guy would carry in his pocket. And when it was transferred into a temple coin, then there was a fee charged to it, and that went right into the priest's pocket. And so all kinds of things were going on to make money off of that, and God is not pleased with that. Look at verse 11. The ephah and the bath shall be of the same measure, so that the bath contains 1/10 of a homer, and the ephah 1/10 of a homer. Their measure shall be according to the homer. So that's going to be the standard for measurement there. Now he's going to talk about some coinage. The shekels shall be 20 gerahs, 20 shekels, 25 shekels, and 15 shekels shall be your minah. And so he's just telling them, this is how I'm going to set up the type of coins that you use. Everything needs to be right, everything needs to be just, everything needs to be fair. God's just setting the guidelines so that man can't step in there and mess it up. This is the offering which you shall offer. I'm in verse 13. You shall give 1/6 of an ephah from an omer of wheat, and 1/6 of an ephah from an omer of barley. Okay, just giving specifics about what he wants for an offering. The ordinances concerning oil. Okay, was oil used in the Old Testament under the Torah? Okay, so they had to give a certain percentage of everything at that time, and if you it's just these are just general instructions on what he wants to have them do for this. So the bath of an oil is 1/10 of a bath from a core. A core is a homer, or 10 baths, for 10 baths are a homer. You can go back in your chart if you're really interested in telling what this is all about. He's just giving specific instructions on what the weight and measurement for oil will be, so that it will be the same for everyone, so that everyone has the same. And 1 lamb shall be given from a flock of 200 from the rich pastures of Israel. What's the significant difference that you see there?
So, didn't they bring one apiece before?
So it was 1/10 of the herd. It was 1/10 of the flock, not an offering, not as an offering, but that was oftentimes there were sheep and goats living together in a flock. And then there would be a little dipper thing that would come down that would have some sort of a marking. Hey, Cindy. Some sort of a marking that would come through and mark out where the what was to be given to the Lord. And so there's going to be a new recipe, so to speak, on that. So 1 out of every 1,000 1 out of every 200 is going to be 1 lamb from the flock from the pastures of Israel. And there shall be grain offerings and burnt offerings and peace offerings to make atonement for them, says the Lord God. Remembering that this is all for memorial usage, right? This is all for a memorial usage. And the people of the land shall give this offering for the prince in Israel. So, not to be confused with they're giving it and somehow making this offering to the prince, but they're giving out of all of these things that he's just listed off to the prince of Israel. And then the prince, this one who got all this good land and we've been talking about, he is going to be in charge of then making the offering. All right, then it shall be the prince's part, here we go, to give burnt offering, grain offering, and drink offering at the feasts, the new moons, the Sabbaths, and all the appointed seasons of the house of Israel. He shall prepare the sin offering, the grain offering, the burnt offering, and the peace offerings to make atonement for the house of Israel. So we see there that the prince is going to take all of these offerings that the people are going to bring in and make them. Now, when is he going to make these offerings? He's going to make them at the feasts. The new moons, the Sabbaths, and all the appointed seasons of the house of Israel. So what does that tell us?
The feast will continue.
Isn't that amazing? That the feasts are going to continue into the millennial kingdom. The new moons. What was the new moon? Does anyone know what that is? So the first of every month, when the moon is a new moon, that designates that the next month begins, and they were very specific about what it was. And as soon as they see that coming up, the priest would notify the high priest that the new moon was to begin, and so it's a celebration of the new month that is going to start there. And so we know that there are going to be new moons. The Sabbath. Interesting, isn't it? That the Sabbath is going to be celebrated. Is it going to be celebrated exactly the same way as God had initiated in the Mosaic Law? We're really not told here, are we? We're not told exactly how it's going to be celebrated. We certainly know it's not going to have all of those little fences that the rabbis and the teachers and the leaders put all around the Sabbath of God, that when Jesus came, he pushed aside and they said, "You're breaking the Sabbath." No, he never broke the Sabbath. He simply pushed aside all of those fences that the Jewish leaders... I lost a necklace. Had put... and it's on tape.
I was thinking,
That he had simply pushed aside all of those rules and regulations that the leaders had placed upon the people, that Jesus says you yourself can't even keep. And so we don't know exactly how the Sabbath is going to be celebrated during the millennial kingdom, but we know that it's going to be celebrated because it says right here that that is going to be one of the things. So all of those will be in effect. All right, on your little list of verses that I gave you in your packet, let's look at a couple of those. It's going to talk about some of the things that we just discussed. And the first one is Amos 8:5, when he says, "When will the new moon be passed, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, that we may trade wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel large, falsifying the scales by deceit?" And so Amos is talking about here, they want everything to hurry up and get done with all the religious stuff so that we can make some money and get what we need to get done here. And he's saying that, and he was being... he was chastising the people for having that sort of a mindset about what they were doing. Look at Micah 6, verses 10 through 12. "And are there yet the treasures of wickedness in the house of the wicked, and the short measure, that is an abomination? Shall I count pure those with wicked scales, and with the bag of deceitful weights? For her rich men are full of violence. Her inhabitants have spoken lies, and their tongue is deceitful in their mouth." And so Micah is talking about the same thing that God has just instructed the people. You need to be righteous and just in the way that you weigh and measure everything. And we can see that that was a problem for them in the past. Look at Leviticus 19, verses 35 and 36. "You shall do no injustice in judgment, in measurement of length, weight, or volume. You shall have honest scales, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. I am the Lord, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt."
Kathy, what was the hand?
You can look on your measurement
Oh, you got it
chart,
on
and
there.
it'll be on there. It'll tell you exactly how much it is. These are all specific weights and measures. But the important part of that one is God was very clear to the people. You need to be honest in all that you weigh and measure. And then he tacks on, why do you need to be honest in all that you weigh and measure? Because I am the Lord, and I am righteous, and I am just, and if you are my people, you will work in the same image that I am. So God counts it as a personal affront when we cheat. That's kind of convicting, isn't it? It's not only that you're going to get caught, you could get caught, you may get caught and pay a consequence for it, but it's a personal affront to the Lord when you cheat someone in a business dealing, or even if you just fudge a little bit, or in any way are not righteous and just, it's a personal affront because he is your Lord God who delivered you out of the bonds of sin. So you can put yourself in that same position. Deuteronomy 25:13 through 16, it says, "You shall not have in your bag differing weights, a heavy and a light. You shall not have in your house differing measures, a large and a small. You shall have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and just measure, that your days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord your God is giving you. For all who do such things, all who behave unrighteously, are an abomination to the Lord your God." And the last one on that is Proverbs 11:1. "Dishonest scales are an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight." So that certainly brings home everything that we were talking about on that.
No.
Do taxes count?
All right, so let's look at the last portion of this, which starts with verse 18, which is the keeping of the feasts.
Can I ask you something?
Sure, of course.
Well, not just that, but when you have unjust, whatever, you have offense and anger, and it produces this whole,
Ripple effect.
yeah, for the enemy
Of
to
course,
live in.
of course,
So it completely takes out the,
right.
the seedbed of offense and whatever.
That's exactly right, because people, that's right. I agree with that 100%.
Offended.
All right, so look at verse 18. "Thus says the Lord God, in the first month, on the first day of the month, you shall take a young bull without blemish and cleanse the sanctuary." So this is, when he's talking about the first month on the first day of the month, that would be the first of the month of Nisan, Nissan. You're going to take a young bull without blemish. We've seen that before. That's how God always expects the sacrifice. And you're going to cleanse the sanctuary. So this is a New Year offering that's going to be given on people. This was not under the Mosaic Law. This is a new thing that he's substantiating here. So the bull was used in the Mosaic Law during the Feast of Atonements. It was taken outside of the area and it was burnt. And there was a whole thing, if you want to read about it in Leviticus. It was not used in the same way. So what you're going to see being described as we go down the list here is a new thing that God wants to have done simply at this new kingdom. Look at verse 19. "The prince shall take some of the blood of the sin offering and put it on the doorposts of the temple, on the four corners of the ledge of the altar, and on the gateposts of the gate of the inner court." And so the priest is going to go around and make the blood offering. Some of that we've seen before, but not in these same places. We've seen blood offerings on the horns, on the altar, different times. But this is a new prescription you haven't seen before that God specifically wants done. Verse 20, "And so shall you do on the 7th day of the month, for everyone has sinned unintentionally or in ignorance. Thus you shall make atonement for the temple." So it appears to be that on the 7th of the month that there is going to be this blood offering going to be given for, once again, we've talked about that's unintentional sinning or out of ignorance, or before in our previous chapter there was one other thing. It was for the simple-minded, or the one who perhaps didn't even realize that what they were doing. You know, God's a fair God. He judges according to what you know and understand, right? And so this offering was going to be done on that. 21, "In the first month, on the 14th day of that month, you shall observe the Passover, a feast of 7 days. Unleavened bread shall be eaten." So the interesting thing to this is that here's our guarantee that we're going to be celebrating the Passover. Yay! I'm happy about that. So I enjoy it even today, and it's going to have far more meaning during this time that the Passover is going to be celebrated. Will it be celebrated exactly the same way? We really don't know, but the Passover today is looking back towards the lamb that was given for Egypt and looking at what Jesus did for us as the Passover lamb for us. And so there could be a whole new portion of this that we get to discover with the Passover celebration at the millennial. We really don't know exactly how it will be celebrated, but we know that it will. So the Passover today is a day celebration, and then it goes immediately into the Feast of Unleavened Bread, where no unleavened bread is eaten. And so today we oftentimes call Passover that whole period of time, but it's actually two feasts. Passover is one day, and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread is the 7 days that follow it. In this particular case, it's going to be a feast of 7 days. He doesn't break it up into a Feast of Unleavened Bread. He simply calls it the Passover here. So is it because of the way we do it, where it's all just one feast? Or is the Feast of Unleavened Bread not going to be celebrated, and for some reason the Passover is going to be a much longer thing? I really don't know. But we do know for sure that the Passover will be celebrated, and we do know for sure that it will be 7 days long, and that no unleavened bread, that only unleavened bread is going to be eaten. No leaven will be allowed, just like today. Those of you who have been to a Seder, you know we've talked about that only unleavened bread, because leaven represents sin, and so it doesn't have a place there. 22, and on that day, which day? The Passover day. The prince shall prepare for himself and all of the people of the land a bull for a sin offering. So that we've seen before in the Old Testament. And on the 7 days of the feast, he shall prepare a burnt offering to the Lord, 7 bulls and 7 rams without blemish. And he is going to do that daily for 7 days. And a kid of the goats daily for a sin offering. So he's very specific about how the prince is going to be the person who officiates at this Passover. This prince is going to take charge of it. Now, does that mean he's going to actually give the offering? No. There will be priests. The Zadok priests will be there doing what needs to be done, or I suppose the Levite priests could do some of that. But the prince will be the one who officiates for that. 24, and he, the prince, shall prepare a grain offering of 1 ephah for each bull and an ephah for each ram, together with a hin of oil for each ephah. So he's just simply letting them know that there is these are going to be significant amounts of offerings that are going to be given during this time of Passover. 25, in the 7th month, on the 15th day of the month, at the feast, he shall do likewise for 7 days, according to the sin offering, the burnt offering, the grain offering, and the oil. So, in the 7th month is in italics, but that's what he's talking about here. The 7th month on the 15th day, there's going to be another feast. And we know that this is going to be the Feast of Tabernacles. That's going to be celebrated there. And he's going to do the same thing, the recipe, so to speak, for how the burnt offerings are going to be given, how the animals will be sacrificed, that sort of thing is going to be the same as it was for the Passover. So this is, one is on the 1st month and one is on the 7th month. So it's 2 a year that we know of for sure that are going to be done here, and he is going to take care of that. We know, I didn't print it out for you, but Zechariah 14, 16 through 19. I'm sorry, I did print it out for you. It's on the next page. Look at that. You can. It's on the 2nd page of your scriptures. We know that this 7th month is the month of Tishrei, Tishrei. That's the month of that, and Zechariah 14 discusses this a little more. Let me read it to you. And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to do what? Worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whichever of the families of the earth do not come up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, on them there will be no rain. If the family of Egypt will not come up and enter in, they shall have no rain. They shall receive the plague with which the Lord strikes the nations who do not come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This shall be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations that do not come up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So if you tie that in with what Ezekiel is telling us here, we know that this Feast of the Tabernacles is going to be an important feast. Because the nations, each nation is considered a family. And if they do not come up to worship at the Feast of Tabernacles, what happens? Oh, maybe that's what's going on with us here.
I've wondered that.
Yeah, maybe we need to prepare an offering. Does anyone have 7 rams that we could use? No, but this is going to be a very important time. And they're specifically coming up to that little tabernacle area that I showed you on your map to do what? Worship the King. And that's, God wants to draw them up to there. So lest anyone be mistaken and think that God is all about, that he's sitting on the throne and he's all about bring things to me. Remember what sacrifice was. Sacrifice was the way that people could do what? Draw near. That's what the word in the Hebrew means. To draw near to the Lord. To commune with God. So God doesn't want them up there making these sacrifices so that he can smell something burning or that he gets all the homage and glory just for his own use. He wants them up there doing that because in the processing of all of this, you have to get your heart right. You have to get that mindset of what it is. You have to make that sacrifice out of what you have. You have to recognize who you're going to see. All of the things that prepare you for worship, even today, right? That's why if you, and we've all done it, if you jump in the car and you and your spouse have a fight on the way, or you and your kids have a fight on the way, or something bad happens and you end up at church, and sometimes it's like, oh, that pastor had a terrible sermon, or I thought the singing was really off, or what. Well, you know what? Sometimes when our hearts aren't right, we can't be of that mindset to worship. And that's why all the things that we do to prepare ourselves for worship aren't to glorify God. They're to help us to get that mindset and that heart set of drawing near to God. If you can get up early and read the text that the lesson is going to be, if you can have worship music playing while you're getting ready, if you can get your mind focused on those things and kind of set aside the world, if you can get your offering check ready ahead of time, if you can do all of those things that we wish we could do all the time but sometimes struggle with, then your worship period time becomes all the more meaningful because your heart is geared and your heart is set there. And that's what this sacrifice is all about. And that's why God wants every nation to come up and worship him so that they can draw near. Because ultimately, what is his desire? A relationship with each one of these people, right? That's what he desires. His love for them is so strong that he desires that they continually remember that. All right, so that's our text on that. We have 3 more chapters, a little bit more information on all of that we've just gone over. We'll go into some of that with a little bit more detail.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure. Do we want to turn this?
This is when I went to use the bathroom and you were talking about the word cubits.